Good afternoon or morning, everyone. So this is going to be one of the longest videos I've ever made, and the goal of this video is to walk you through how to replace the engine in your blown up WRX or STI. I'm going to try to make this as step-by-step as possible, from how to disassemble the dressed engine, how to get everything off, how to get the engine out, how to rebuild the cylinder heads, how to rebuild a new motor, how to get it installed, how to get everything hooked up, where all the PCV lines go, the whole kit and caboodle of all this. So before we get into just tearing this car apart, I've got all the parts lined up on this table back here for what we need to be able to replace an engine, and some things that I highly suggest you consider doing as well while you have your engine out. So I'm going to timestamp this entire video, so if you're only looking for a specific part of it, everything will be down below in the description for you guys. All of the specialty tools that we have, all of the parts used in this video will also be linked down below, either via part numbers or with actual product links. So let me show you what I got on the table, and let's start tearing apart this 05 STI. Actually, before we go into tearing this thing apart and going over what's on the table right there, I would like to take a second to talk about the different scenarios in which you may find yourself needing to replace your engine. This 05 STI is best case scenario. It spun a bearing, it still runs, it still drives, it drove off the trailer, drove into this garage, so it's still a functional motor. But because there's a spun bearing, there are things that we do as precautionary measures, which we will go over once we get to the parts on the table. Now, worst case scenario, you're going to end up taking out your cylinder heads. As an example, here is a 2-liter EJ20 that we pulled out of another car. As you guys can see, there's a massive hole right there. We've got a graveyard of cylinder heads and oil pans over here that we're taking to the dump in a couple of days. Unfortunately, sometimes you do lose the head. Now, you can lose an engine multiple ways. You can have a failed oil pump, you can have a bad tune, you can have really bad detonation, you can have debris or FOD, foreign object debris, get into your oil system, get under a bearing, get under the crankshaft, between the bearing and the crankshaft. There's a ton of things that can take out these motors. Overheating, if you overheat your car too much, you can warp the cylinder heads beyond machining capabilities to be able to repair them. When you need to replace cylinder heads is when things get expensive. I don't always advise buying used cylinder heads. Buy them at your own caution, but I would say just snag new ones. It's better safe than sorry. It's your car, you can do what you want, but there's a vast array of things that can go wrong. And it's not just Subarus, this is any car. So this STI that we have here is about 20 years old at this point. It's an 05, it's 18 years old. So whenever we do some of these older builds, there are things that I require that we swap out when we go through them, such as hoses. Hoses get hot, they get old, they get rotted, they get hard. When you can no longer bend or squish a hose, it is time to replace it if you're doing a rebuild. If your car still functions and it runs just fine, don't worry about it. So go through the catalog for parts, look at the diagrams, figure out what you need, get your hoses ordered. We wanted everything on this build, so we got every single hose that is underneath that hood, including a new turbo inlet. You can go OEM or aftermarket. Next up, cam sprockets. If you have a bearing failure or an engine failure, I always suggest swapping out cam sprockets, at least the AVCS ones. AVCS cam sprockets like these do have oil that flow through them, and they are regulated by the VVT solenoid, which we have two brand new ones right there. Essentially, anything that oil touches, you're gonna want to replace it. These plastic exhaust cam gears, if you have a single AVCS car, you do not absolutely need to replace those, but keep in mind these are plastic. They do get brittle with heat, and I have seen these break. So if it's a car that has over 120,000 miles, we always suggest replacing them. They're about 40 bucks each. Highly suggest doing it. Moving on, I mentioned VVT solenoids. We have brand new ones right here. They're about $100 each. You're also gonna want a brand new oil cooler. These often get overlooked. These are impossible to clean. You can sit there and try to clean this for days if you want to, but I guarantee you'll never get all the contamination out of it. Just buy a brand new one. There's a brand new thermostat for the cooling system, brand new oil filter. You are going to need some type of gasket maker. I always use Fuji 3 Bond. It's just OEM Subaru stuff. If you have an 04 to 07 STI, you are going to need half moons. That can also be applied to early model Legacies, Foresters, anything that is an XT or a GT variant. You will need these if you do have B25 cylinder heads. Next, we have a gasket and seal kit. This has all the engine gaskets, the OEM head gaskets, everything that you're going to need to be able to reseal the engine. We always use these. These are the FU cam gear bolts. They swap out the stock 10mm Allen cam gear bolt for these 17mm hex heads. These will make your life a million times easier if you ever have to go back in there and service anything. This engine does have a stock oil pickup and stock baffle on it, so we are replacing those with Killer B, as the stock ones do tend to break near the top of the pickup because they are brazed, they are not welded. We are using a brand new OEM 11mm oil pump here. we have an ASIN TKF004 timing belt kit. This should fit pretty much any turbo model Subaru for the most part, WRX or STI, excluding FA20s and FA24s. Because this car does have 140,000 miles on it, we are going to be replacing the valve springs, we're going to be lapping the valves and rebuilding the heads. Then they're going to go off to a machine shop to get decked. So we're going to be running some BC valve springs. I always prefer ARP head studs on these cars. These are just ARP 2000s. They are worth the money. You don't have to mess with head bolts. It just makes life a lot easier, and the hardware is stronger. I wouldn't recommend this for high boost applications. If you're looking at that, obviously jump up to like 1/2 inch. Everything is old, so we have a set of brand new Group N STI engine mounts there. We are replacing the flywheel with a brand new OEM one and an OEM replacement exity clutch. Any car that has excess of 150,000 miles or is 20 years old, we always swap out the engine harnesses. These get just smacked with so much heat. These are now cheap enough to the point where they are justifiable to replace. These engine harnesses are about $250 to $300 in that price range. Just buy a brand new OEM harness if you're going to the extent of replacing everything else. They get crusty, they get old. You guys will see that as we're tearing apart this engine. And then lastly, we are tossing on an IAG air oil separator to fix the PCV system in the car, because Subarus are known to have just crap PCV systems, and this will help with a lot of the blow-by that the car may see. And then in the box here, we have a brand new 2018 Plus STI Type RA short block. Anything that's sub 400 wheel horsepower, I suggest these to people for the price. Now that we've gone through everything on the table over here, and you guys kind of have an idea of what you're gonna need, which this is about $10,000 worth of parts, so keep in mind this stuff ain't cheap to do. And if you're paying someone like me or another shop to do this for you, keep in mind it's going to be a couple thousand more expensive. Engine replacements I've seen cost anywhere between $3,000 to $6,000, somewhere in that ballpark. For engine replacements like this, I charge near like the $3,000 to $3,500 price range. So just keep that in mind. Every shop's gonna charge you a different amount. So now that we've covered all that stuff, let's jump into the car. So what we're gonna start out with doing is removing the battery. You're gonna have a 10 mil here and here for the battery tie down. You're gonna have the 2 terminals that go to the battery. Once we get those out, we're gonna pull the battery out. We're gonna get the car up in the air to get the coolant out of it and get the oil out of it. So after getting the car up in the air, we can see that it is leaking some either oil or power steering fluid. I don't know off the top of my head, but now that we have it up in the air, we can get the fluids out. Now, if you come down under the car, I feel like it's pretty self-explanatory. This one has a Fumoto valve on it right there. So we're gonna open up that Fumoto valve and let it drain into the oil pan. And then the coolant has a petcock on it right here, which it looks like somebody had a hose on there, which just totally works. You can leave a hose on there. There's a little twist on the side of it, or a little screw there. If you don't have a Fumoto valve, then you're just gonna pop out your drain plug. So we're gonna let the coolant and the oil drain for probably a half hour. I just wanna let as much of it come out as possible, and then we'll come back and start disassembling the car. Oh no, yeah, that's all just gonna, that's fine. We're gonna get cracking on tearing this thing apart now. We're gonna start off with the radiator up here just to get it out of the way and get any excess coolant that may be in here out of the car. So you have one hose clamp here, one here, both of those route up to the upper expansion tank here. You've got one radiator fan clip right down there. You've got another one on the opposing side down by the lower radiator hose down there. Then you've got the upper hose here. After you get all of the hoses undone, you can pop off this 12 mil, this 12 mil, and then we can pull the radiator right out. Radiator hose is going to go in the garbage. Or just a fan clip from up here, I think. There's that fan. Now, if you have an older Subaru like this one, your power steering line may be held in by a clip on the radiator. You can go ahead and just pull that out. We should just be able to pull the radiator up and out. Just like like so. Radiator out of the way, we have a lot more room to work. So we're gonna go ahead and pull the intake and the airbox out next. You're gonna go ahead, undo the math clip here, set that aside. You can tuck it down there if need be. Undo the hose clamp that holds it to the turbo inlet here. You may have some bolts down there on the frame. As you guys can see, this airbox does not. Find those two clips. There's gonna be one there, probably one on the backside of this post MAF hose, and then this whole assembly should just pull right out. Just like so, airbox is out. Remove the intercooler here. If you have an air oil separator, you are not going to have this hose. Since we are installing an air oil separator, this hose will not be going back on. What this is a crossover tube between the cylinder heads to route everything back into the turbo inlet. So this is going away. Now to get the intercooler off, you've got a hose right here on the throttle body. Go ahead, undo that coupler there. You're gonna have another one on the turbo right down here. Most of these are going to be worm gear. Both OEM and aftermarket, pretty much all of them are worm gear, so undo those a decent amount. You're gonna have your bypass valve here. You're gonna have an intercooler support bracket on both sides of the intercooler. They're all gonna be held on by 12 mils, so you can go ahead and undo those 3 12 mils that hold that side of the intercooler bracket on. Get that bracket out, grab all your hardware. Now, if this is your first time doing this, I do suggest labeling your hardware. I've done it enough times. I can just throw it all in a box. When it comes to reassembly, I know where all it goes. Bypass valve's gonna come off. Now our bypass valve should be free of the intercooler, which it is. Next up, you got a couple options to remove this crossover tube. I'm just gonna remove the hoses from the ends of it. On that side and on this side. Now the intercooler should lift up and out. Come on, there we go. Intercooler's out. The intercooler out of the way. Next up, we're gonna remove this upper expansion tank. So we've got one hose here going from the tank down to the turbo. We've got these two hoses that went to the radiator. And we've got one more hose that goes down to a crossover tube underneath the manifold. So we're gonna go ahead and pull this hose off, undo this bolt, that bolt, and then this third bolt right here. That's gonna make this come loose. Then we can pick this up, hit the hose clamp that's underneath of it going down to the crossover tube, get that piece out of the way. Since we are installing an air oil separator, this hose is not going to be reused. So here, hit up these. I can pick this guy up. Then right there is our hose clamp for the hose that goes to the crossover tube. Get that hose clamp off of there. Break that free a little bit. And this guy should pull out. Just like that. Alternator and air conditioning that we're gonna get out. So for the alternator, there's gonna be a 12 mil bolt right on the top of it. We're gonna go ahead and take that off. For this, I always like to put the bolt back on there after I take the wire off. Be careful, sometimes there is a washer. There is one clip there that we'll get in a minute. Next up, we need to loosen underneath of this little arm here. There's a 12 mil. Go ahead and loosen that. Loosen up the other 12 mil on the opposite side of the alternator underneath the tension arm. Don't take it out, just loosen it. Then come up here to this bolt here adjacent to the belt and loosen that. That's gonna drive the alternator down. Then you can come in here, take the belt off, set the belt aside, then we can get the alternator out. To do that, we're just gonna take out these two bolts that we loosened, and that will free the alternator. I always put these back in the alternator. You can put them in your box or put them wherever you want. Now we can come right here, pick up on the alternator, swing it up, and we've got a green plug here on the back side, which it looks like this one is already broken, so we might have to repair that for him, but that's all right. Alternator comes out. On the back side of the alternator, you're gonna have this little bracket that kind of just sits on the alternator like so. Now for the AC here, I see a lot of people make this mistake where they undo the AC lines and take this completely out of the car. You don't need to do that. Come down here, loosen up the tensioner bolt. It's the only one on the pulley. Just loosen it up. Come back here on the back side of it, you'll see another 12, and go ahead and just loosen that. By loosening that bolt, you'll see that there's less and less tension on this. So after you loosen that and bring it up, you can go ahead and take the belt off for the AC, set that aside, and then take off the two 12s that hold it to the AC. Got the alternator out of the way, the belt's off. We could go ahead and start working on getting this manifold disconnected. Now on these older ones, it's not as bad as it is on the newer ones. The newer ones can be a little bit more annoying. There's a couple different steps involved in this. A, you need to disconnect the engine harness from everywhere that you can. On these older models, you're gonna have 2 connections on each side of the engine, one over here, 2 over there, or 2 over there, 2 over here. On newer models, you're just gonna have 1 bulkhead connector up here. Now, if you have a 08 plus STI or a car that has dual AVCS, you're gonna have oil control valve electrical connectors, which are gonna be these little blue ones right here, and cam position sensors on the bottom of the engine also. There's gonna be 2 on each side. Make sure you get those. On these older ones, it's not too bad. You got your crankshaft position sensor here, oil pressure sensor there, coolant temperature sensor, power steering pressure switch. You've got your oil control valve for the right-hand cylinder head. You've got your cam position sensor underneath all of these hoses. It's literally right there. You got coil pack, coil pack. Back here, you've got the knock sensor right there, which is gonna be that brown plug. You don't need to undo the map sensor here. You don't need to undo the throttle body sensor there, or you don't need to undo the throttle body connector there. On this side of the engine, you've got 2 coil pack connectors. You're gonna have another oil control valve guy right there, another cam position sensor down there. After you get the wire harness disconnected, you're gonna need to undo the fuel lines up here. You can either undo them from the manifold side, or you can undo them from this side. I always undo them from the manifold side and then just tuck these lines back over here. If you need to, take a picture of the orientation for all of these so that way you don't get confused on which one goes where, so you don't put the feed on the return and the return on the feed. Make sure you just take a mental note of it at least. So after we get those off, then we're gonna come down here and we're gonna hit all the 12s. There's 1 right there. There's 2 down there, 1 on each side of the fuel lines here, another one right up there, and then same thing on the other side. Then once we get all of those undone, we can snake back here to the turbo, undo that little worm gear clamp holding the turbo inlet to the turbo, and then this manifold should just pull right off. So the way I like to do these electrical connections is I start from one side of the engine and work my way over. So we got coil pack here. Yeah, see, this is why we're replacing the engine harness. A lot of his connectors are broken, and I'll show you guys this. So we got coil packs here. We can snake up here to grab the engine harnesses here, undo these 2 connections. There should be, on this car, a white one here and then a gray one right below it. And then while we're over here, if you want to, you can do this now or later. You have the front O2 sensor here, which is normally going to be shielded in a blue wire. You can go ahead and disconnect that as well and just kind of tuck that underneath of the car if you'd like. I'm just going to kind of put it right there for now. We have our oil control valve connection here, which is that little blue clip. Some of these, if you haven't taken any of these off in a long time, some of them might not want to come off. So what you might have to do is grab like a little flathead, push down on the clip with the flathead, and then push with your finger. And then typically they come off like this one did. We have our cam position sensor hiding down here, which these ones are always the worst ones to get because they're just kind of tucked in there a good ways. That one's undone. Come up here to the front, get the crankshaft position sensor here. Oil pressure sensor, power steering pressure switch, our coolant temperature sensor. For some reason the coolant temp sensor is always giving me a hard time. Coolant temp sensor. We can reach back here to the back side, get the knock sensor, which is that brown little connector. And then we can come over to the other side over here. We can go ahead and get this brown engine harness connector. Like I said, some of these are just old and they don't always want to come apart nicely. Black one, which is actually broken and I have to use this. The oil control valve guy. Now, if you're like me and you're a little bit lazy, you can go ahead and take the windshield washer reservoir out if you have an older model like this, which is gonna be this one green clip. It's just gonna give you more room in here. And then it's these 2 10s right here. I like to do it, it just makes a little bit more room in here, which is always nice. And you're gonna have one hose coming off the bottom of it right here. Go ahead and just pop that off, plug that with your finger, set this aside. Now we've got a little bit more room to work down in here, so I can reach my hand down in here to feel around for that cam position sensor. And once we get the manifold off, I'll show you where these cam position sensors are because you're just not gonna be able to see them with everything on. Sweet, all right. Now we can go ahead and hit these fuel lines right here. So these are all held on with just some Phillips heads, and then the bottom one just has a little clip. The bottom one, or the smallest line, is typically going to be your evap line, so there's not going to be any fuel in it. Now if you have a newer Subaru that's 08 plus, you're going to need this fuel line quick disconnect tool. Super easy, you just slide it inside of the quick connect fitting, push it in, then you can pull the fuel line off. On these older ones, it's just these little fuel line Phillips head screw guys. Super easy to do. On these older ones, they don't always want to come off. So you can see I can tug on that thing all I want and it's not going anywhere. You grab like a pair of needle nose pliers. You can grab the hose and spin it a little bit. Try to wiggle it around. That might help. If not, you might just have to cut it and replace the line, which is not a big deal. If you got to do that, you can pick up fuel line at the auto parts store for cheap. There we go. Fuel line's off. Oh, but not on this one, of course. It's whatever. We'll replace them anyways. Get this evap line down here. Boom. So there's our two fuel lines and our evap line off of there. And now we can start hitting all of those 12s that hold the manifold and the TGV housings down to the block. Come over to this side. There's gonna be one right behind this turbo inlet here and behind this hard line. And make sure that you get them at least all the way or as far as you can. One in between on this side. There's gonna be one back here by the turbo that is kind of tucked down there a little ways, so you might have to fish around for it, but you'll get it. One right up here in the front again. In between the fuel line guys down here. Here. And right here. Grab all these out if you want to. I like to, so there's nothing dangling around. So they're gonna be these longer 12 mils. There's gonna be 8 of them. Go ahead and undo these 2 vacuum lines for the boost controller. So now that we've got the harness disconnected, the fuel lines disconnected, and the manifold loose from the car, we can go ahead and undo the hose clamp holding the turbo inlet to the turbo there. We can pull off the brake booster line here, and then there's 2 coolant lines that go from the throttle body right there down to the coolant crossover tubes. We're gonna have to undo those. You can either undo them from the throttle body itself, or you can undo it from the hard line. I think I'll probably just undo it from the throttle body, make my life a little bit easier. Right here, pop off this brake booster line. Throttle body coolant lines. There's always gonna be 2 of them. Go. Coolant lines are off. Oh. So now we should be able to see how we can start moving it now. Since we're swapping out a lot of the power steering stuff on this, so I'm gonna go ahead and just remove the power steering pressure connector. That's the problem with these older ones, is you have this hard line for the power steering pump that goes right over there. If you are not replacing power steering components, just undo the power steering pump from the block. There's 3 12 mils to be able to hit them and get them out. 2 in the front and then 1 right down there. But to make life a little bit easier, if you want, you can go ahead and move that line out of the way. And we can go ahead and pick this manifold up, push it back there. As you can see, it might fight you a little bit. Don't be afraid to manhandle it. Now to move AC so you don't have to disconnect any AC lines with your manifold kind of pushed out of the way, you'll see a 14 mil behind it right down there, a 14 right there, another one here, and then you'll see another one right back there. Undo all 4 of those, go ahead, pick this guy up, and just put it where the battery went. We're gonna do the same thing with the power steering pump. So there's a 12 mil right down there, and then 2 down in the front. We're just gonna pick that up and put it where the intake was. Here's one of the front ones. I actually think we're replacing this power steering pump for him also. What you can do is go ahead and pick this guy up and just kind of tuck it out of the way right over there. You're probably gonna leak power steering fluid if you popped that line off like I did. So if you did, just be prepared. Now for the AC. So for AC, it's gonna be the exact same. Undo the 1 electrical connector here for the AC switch. Move this harness just kind of out of the way. Put it down by the battery also, or where the battery would have been. Pick up the AC compressor and just put it over here. So now we've got full access and we should just be able to pick this guy up pull it out. Now you're left with a pretty naked looking engine. So now that we have clear line of sight, I can actually show you guys where these sensors are. So this is your cam position sensor here. It's just tucked down a ways. You're not really gonna be able to see it. You really got to feel for it. This is your AVCS solenoid. You've got an AVCS solenoid here, and you've got another cam position sensor here. This was that little 90 that went to the coolant expansion tank. This front hose here is the block breather that connected up to the crossover tube. This bigger one here is this hose here, which comes down to this centralized block breather here. So the rear ones go to the centralized one, the front ones go up and over the intercooler. So now that we've got all that out of the way, what we can do is start disassembling everything to be able to get this engine out. That's going to include getting the starter out, getting the heater core hoses out here, getting the downpipe off of the turbo back there. We're gonna leave the turbo on to pull the engine. Actually, maybe we'll pull the turbo out to pull the engine just so that way I can show you guys how to do that. Once we've got those basic things done, we can go ahead and get this engine out. Heater core hoses can come off. Have OEM ones, you won't have worm gear clamps like these. Sometimes you gotta wiggle them loose a little bit. These will probably, trip a little bit of coolant. Normally I just tuck them up behind this AC line up here. Now, tuck you right up there for now. Crossover tube comes off next. There's 4 10mm bolts. And then that guy will come right out, as well as this PCV crossover tube that goes down to the block. It's probably gonna be a little bit on there, so if you want, go ahead and grab like a flathead and just kind of pop the clip off. Like that. Just hit it with a flathead and it should pop. Got one hose clamp here. This guy up and out of the way. Slide this guy off of that hose. Sometimes you just gotta twist these a little bit to free them up. That fell down into the transmission. It's a good thing we're taking this out. One of the lines that always breaks is this little block breather tube here. Like I said, just get new hoses, man. It'll make your life way easier. Now, if you wanted to make it look a little bit less intimidating in here, you can go ahead and pull off this PCV breather system here. So like I said, I just stick a little flathead in there, grab something, give it a couple whacks, it'll pop that clip free. Now, if it's old like this, it's probably crusty and rock hard, so you may need to get something in there to work at it a little bit to free it. But, or they'll just crack and break because they're old and gross. Look at this turbo. This thing's been sucking in some oil. Wipe that up a little bit. So on your starter back here, you've got the ground wire that goes to the engine here. Normally this does not go to the engine. This normally goes up here to this top bolt on the starter. We're gonna pull this ground wire off. We're gonna pull off the bolt that holds the 12mm power cable to the starter. And then there's also a small signal wire underneath of that, which you can come in here and it normally just like pulls right off. Sometimes you gotta unclip it, but it just pulls off. It's this little like female style connector. And then the starter's just held on with 2 14mm bolts. Pull off the ground cable. There's our ground. Kind of tuck that down and out of the way for now. Here, start to pull off these 14s. Other one, there's another bell housing bolt, and then the starter can slide back and come up and out. Now we just gotta hit up. This boot just doesn't want to come off the fucking starter for some reason. There it is, 12 mil. We got starter out, 2 bell housing bolts. Let me set this aside, and we can jump over to the turbo side. Now before I jump to just pulling out the turbo, I like to get this intercooler bracket out of the way. So 12 mil right there. This bottom one's a little bit annoying and you're probably gonna need a wrench for it, but it just frees up a little bit more room for you to be able to get your hands in there. 12. And it's barely even on there, so it's not even tight. But for the sake of this video, I will pull the turbo out just to show you guys how to. Intercooler bracket's out of the way. Now we can focus on this turbo here. I'm gonna go ahead and pull these lines out of the way. We've got one vacuum line going to the T-fitting here, which is reference for the turbo itself, which I can just pull that off for now. It's not a big deal. I'll go ahead and get this coolant line off because that is not getting reused since we are using an air oil separator on this car, which I advise all of you guys to use. when it comes to the turbo, we got a couple things here that we got to take off to get this thing out. So like I said, on the turbo here, you've got your oil return line right down there on the bottom side. You'll see that clamp right there. You're gonna have to undo that a little bit. You've got your coolant line here that goes to the bottom of the turbo. You've got your oil feed line, which is gonna be right in the middle on the top. It's gonna be that 14. Then you've got all these downpipe bolts. Once we get the downpipe off, we can then go down there and hit all those 14s, holding the up pipe and the turbo together, and get the turbo out. Once the turbo's out, we're pretty much ready to take this engine out. At the stage it's in now, I could take it out, but just for the video's sake, let me show you guys how to remove that thing. So if you're like me, you can be, and you bought all new hoses, you can be a little bit aggressive with these. If not, you're gonna have to be a little bit more gentle, so just keep that in mind. The oil feed for the turbo is a 14 mil. Go ahead, pop that out. Now when you go to put all of this back together, I will show you guys which, oh my gosh, it's stuck. I'll show you guys which one of these goes where, but the oil feed is always a smaller banjo fitting. Okay, now I can start working at these downpipe bolts, which they look old and rusty, so this is probably not gonna be a fun time. Surprisingly, that one came off pretty easy. Oh wow, these are all loose, okay. Makes my life easier.
Yeah, I know that part.
3 out of 5, done. You can get the bottom downpipe bolt from the top, but it can be a little bit annoying sometimes, kind of like with what I'm doing, especially on these catless, like NVIDIA downpipes. They just suck, but luckily I was able to get this one out. So all 5 of the downpipe bolts are off. See our downpipe kind of moves around a little bit. So there's gonna be 5 in total. 2 of them are going to be bolts and nuts. The other 3 are gonna be studs with a 14mm nut on it. So now that we've got the downpipe loose, ready to come out, I'm gonna go ahead and hit this coolant clamp here. Coolant clamp, slide it down, and pull off this coolant hose. Bada bing, bada boom. Once we get the downpipe out of the car, ready to pull the turbo out. So we have a couple more things to do topside, then we gotta go underneath of the car. Now on the STIs, what you're gonna have is down here, if you look at the clutch fork here, right below that, there's going to be a 14mm Allen plug. So right there is our 14mm plug. We're gonna take that out. What we're gonna do at that point is come over to your box of bolts or wherever you have your bolts, and you're gonna grab an M6x1. An M6x1 is going to be something like the water crossover tube bolts, or these 10 mils on your intake manifold. They're gonna be this size bolt. This is going to thread into the clutch fork slide pin, and then you're just gonna grab the bolt and you can pull it right out. We'll lift up on the clutch fork, and then we can disengage the clutch fork from the engine. On this engine, it's a 10. Normally they are not. I forgot on the older ones, they are smaller, so break that free. Pull this guy out, and we can just go ahead and pop it out by. Now what you're pulling out right now is just a plug. So it's just a plug that goes in the side of the transmission. Just gonna pull that out. You're gonna go ahead and grab your M6x1. Go into the hole, you're gonna feel around, and then you're gonna start threading that in. Now once you start threading it in, and you got a couple threads on there, you can go ahead and slide it out. Sometimes it doesn't want to, like this one, so I'm gonna use a pair of pliers to kind of pry on it a little bit. Push it towards me. There it is. So there's your big slide pin. When you go to install these, lube them up. Once you get this out, you can come right here and just pull up on the clutch fork. Now your clutch fork is disengaged. So we're gonna go ahead and unthread the bolt out of this guy. Like I said, right in the front of it, you're gonna have that threaded hole. It's just so you can thread a bolt in there and pull it out. Now while we're still in the general vicinity, we're just gonna go ahead and pop off the pitch top mount. One on each side, ratchet on one side, and take this bolt out off the front. So there are washers on both sides. Go ahead and just grab the fork a little bit, wiggle it. So now it's time to come under the car and start pulling out some more stuff. So if you look at your oil pan here, you got your front subframe right here. If you go right behind that front subframe, well actually you can see your engine mount right here, adjacent to the oil pan. Now right above the sway bar, you're gonna have a 14mm nut right up there. There's gonna be one on each side of the subframe. Take both of those out. You're gonna go back here to your downpipe and you're gonna remove that O2 sensor. You don't have to undo it from the downpipe, just follow the wire and unclip it. It should be up on the other side of the transmission right there. Unclip that and then undo the 2 bolts that hold the downpipe to the catback, and then the whole downpipe should slide out. You may have a mount right here. Some downpipes don't. Undo that also. Do that one last because your downpipe right now is technically loose, so that should be the last one that you want to do. It's just a transmission hanger. And then you're going to come right here on these 2 studs on your transmission cross member. You don't need to take them off, just loosen them all the way and then just kind of let them come down. And then after that, we'll be able to jack up this transmission to be able to get the engine out. So let me get the downpipe out, loosen these, and undo these. Trans mount. Nope. Downpipe. So with everything down below done, now we can take turbo out. So you're gonna have a 14 mil right there, and then if you look on the back side of this flange straight down, there's gonna be one more 14. After you get those, take off the gasket also, because you will slice your hand on it. I've done it before. Then there's gonna be one more on the back side of the turbo, straight down on the flange. Take out those 3, and then we're gonna pull the turbo straight out, and then from there, we can go ahead and start getting the engine ready to be pulled. There's the back one. Now should have known there was something funky with this one when I saw it was a 15. Please snap. Okay, that's good. Bolt snapped, the studs are replaceable. Best case scenario, if it gets stuck, you're gonna want the bolt to snap like that one did. One more 14, and then our turbo can come out. Who's the asshole that put this turbo on? Dude, someone was a real douche. Someone was a real douche, whoever worked on this car in the past. I want you to know that. If it's you, real douche move. Looks like we're pulling it with the turbo on. Sometimes you gotta change up your game plan a little bit. So now that we've gotten everything else out of the way, what we can go ahead and do is, on the back side of the bell housing, you're gonna see a lot of 14 mils. Everywhere on the back side of the bell housing, we're gonna be pulling them out. We've already pulled 2 out for the other side for the starter. So there's probably gonna be, I wanna say there's 6 more. So this engine's also been apart before, which doesn't help because when people take these apart, they never put them back together right. So if you take apart your car, put it back together the right way. Sometimes a little mallet action can get it started for you. Should be our last one holding the engine to the transmission. So we can go grab the engine hoist. I'll show you where to hook up all of the hoist locations to be able to pull this thing out. Some people like to just pull them fully dressed. I personally don't like to do that. I've seen intake manifolds break. Out. I'll run my hand along the backside just to make sure we got them all out, which we did. Well, I thought I was recording and it wasn't. Now I have the hoist hooked up here. These are not my ideal spots for it, but if you're using a 2-point position to pick up the engine, AC bracket off the front, and then back here behind the turbos where I normally go, that's gonna be a 12 mil, I'll go diagonal or just across from each other. If you have a 4-post like this, power steering pump bracket, AC bracket, back here by the starter, and then normally back there by the turbo, but since I can't get to that one, I'm just right off the middle. So let's go ahead and grab our engine hoist, bring it over here, and get this thing out of here. Now when it comes to pulling these out, there is no big secret, there is no shenanigans, secret sauce that it takes to get these out. We've already done everything that we need to be able to pull this engine out. Keep an eye on things that may be getting snagged, maybe getting caught, or maybe getting hung up, such as power steering, air conditioning, fuel lines, anything like that. Because you don't want to be tugging on the engine if there's still something hooked up. Now normally these would have a ground strap on the bottom of the engine to the frame rail. This one did not, but if yours does, make sure you do get that, otherwise you will rip that ground strap straight off. Now this one hasn't come apart in a very long time, so what we're gonna have to do is break the seal between the engine and the transmission. It's starting to pull apart a little bit, but there are 2 dowel pins in there that will hold it together. Now when you go to do this and you go to break this free, you're gonna have to catch the engine with your hand to make sure that it doesn't take out your AC condenser, because it will. Ask me how I know. There we go. Now we should be able to get it right out. Yep. Make sure we don't smack the hood. Let's go ahead and quickly get this out before the hood decides to come down. Pull this thing out from the engine bay now. Now before we can get this on the engine stand, we are gonna have to go ahead and pull off this clutch and flywheel. All of this is garbage except for the hardware, so let's go ahead and pull that off. We're gonna need a 12 and a 14 and it should come right off. Now, if you are reusing your clutch, you're gonna wanna do this in a star pattern. We're only reusing the hardware, so I'm just gonna go ahead and zap them all off. Where? There it goes. Alright, so we got our clutch off. If you want, you can resurface this. We are replacing. Oh yeah, dude, everything's leaking on this engine. At this point, we're ready to start tearing apart our engine. So there's a couple of things that I like to do before just tearing into it. We're gonna get all the accessories off. That's gonna be the exhaust manifold down here. We're gonna get the coil packs off. We'll get the oil fill tube off. All the little stuff, the sensors, cam position, crank position, oil pressure, all that stuff. We're gonna take it all off. So don't be too intimidated when looking at this. I feel like a lot of people get their engine out there like, I have no idea where to start. Because typically people will pull this and then just put a fully dressed used engine back in. We're not, I don't like doing that. Too many unknown variables. So let's go ahead, start undressing this thing, and we'll start pulling it apart. We're gonna start by pulling out the coil packs, 12 mils. Make this thing easier to turn over when we gotta turn it over. And while we're at it, we can go ahead and pull out spark plugs. These are gonna be 16 mil. Plugs were not in here very tight. Brake pulley, big 22, 1/2 inch Ugga Dugga should get it. As always, if you don't have a 1/2 inch impact, you can use the tool from Company 23 to hold this, but that guy should work. Now sometimes these don't always want to come off. There we go. Timing covers, whole bunch of 10s going around. You're gonna want to start with the outers. We're gonna order new timing covers for this because this one does have a broken timing cover here. So I'm gonna inspect the backside, and this front central one is also broken. So, timing covers. This one is trash. Center one is also broken and is trash. We're gonna come right here to where the thermostat housing is. We're gonna pull this guy off. About the old thermostat, there will be water that comes out. Now we're gonna go ahead, we're gonna put our crank bolt back in. We're gonna go ahead and get timing lined back up on this and take timing off. Now you don't want to just start pulling off all of these timing components. What you want to do is get all the timing lined up and then take them off to ensure that nothing breaks. So we're gonna go ahead and take off our timing guard right there and right there so we can see what we're doing. And now this is why we took out the spark plugs first, make this a little bit easier to turn over. If you're looking at the front of your engine here, on the oil pump right here, you're gonna have a line. You're also gonna have that line on the sprocket. You're gonna line those up. Now this can be 180 degrees out. You could have this lined up and both sides of the cams are gonna be out. You just gotta spin this around another. So right here on the sprocket, this sprocket's a little bit old, but it is on there. Focus on it. There's a line at the top of the sprocket. There's also a cutout on the top of the timing cover right there. Same thing on this side. There's a cutout. There's a line. You're also gonna have the same thing on the side of the timing cover here. You've got a cutout. And then you also have your line on the gear. Same thing on that side. And then to verify, you're gonna have 2 little teeth. 2 on the exhaust cam, 2 on the intake cam. Those will line up. Don't worry about that side. They're always going to be a little bit off. If you look at it here, the marks aren't even lined up, but that's typically just how it goes. It's the AVCS in this not always being sprung and adjusting a little bit. So if those are off, don't stress it too much right now. So for timing, since we're all lined up, we're gonna go ahead, we're gonna pull off this bottom pulley first. Go ahead and slide that out. I'm gonna take the bolt. The pulley itself is garbage. Replacing that. Next up, we're gonna do this top one. We're gonna pull off the tensioner. The entire tensioner assembly is garbage. I'm gonna pull off. That's all right. Don't freak out if it does that. A lot of people freak out. This one will probably do it too. Don't freak out. Pull that guy off. All garbage. We're only keeping the bolts off of them. Go ahead and take the belt off. Be the guy that reuses your timing belt either. Just buy a brand new one. Actually, if you get a brand new one, it should come with your kit anyways, so. Now for the fun part, it's gonna be getting these gears off. So these top ones are your AVCS gears. These are the ones that flow oil through them. If your car's dual AVCS, you're gonna have 4 gears that look like this. 2 on the intake, 2 on the exhaust. On single AVCS, you only have them up here. If you're a single AVCS engine, you're only gonna have 1 gear and it's gonna look like these ones. So, your passenger side gear should rotate pretty free. This one will probably rotate pretty free. This one's still sprung, so if I, there it goes. So now this one's pretty free. Don't be freaked out if these move, they're going to move. The only reason you want them lined up when you take timing off is just a precautionary measure, so. Now we'll take this guy off, toss it aside. Now for the fun part, getting these gears off, because they don't always like to come off. Now we get the pleasure of these little shits. So the AVCS gears, there's 3 8mm. Take them off. Do it for both sides. And they're going to leak oil. Let me do the other side. Pop this off. Like I said, it's going to leak oil. At least it should, if there's not much in that one. These little shits are 10mm Allens. Okay? They are these. They like to strip out all the time. I found that adding a little bit of valve grinding compound inside of those makes them come out a lot easier. Take a little bit of valve grinding compound and just squirt it in there. It's just gonna help keep this from rounding out. Then we're gonna take our Company 23 tool and find where it wants to sit, which is right there. We're gonna use the crank bolt to hold that in place. We'll bring our 10mm with the Allen right here, and we're gonna start trying to take this thing off. Didn't round. You can go ahead. I'm gonna leave it on for now. Actually, the bolt's coming off, so I might as well just take it off. Take off our tool, undo this. I'm telling you, this is the best way to get these gears off because these little shits strip. And we're not reusing these 10mm Allens. We have 17s to replace these. You can keep them if you want, but I'm gonna toss them. These gears, also garbage. We don't use anything with a bearing failure that's seen oil. Same thing for the exhaust gear. Bring this guy right in here. Rest it on the crank bolt right there. Grab our valve grinding compound, squirt a little bit in here. 10mm back in again. Oh, this one feels like rounding. Oh, thank God. Woo! We have new exhaust cam gears also for these. I'm gonna go rinse my eyes out now, if you'll excuse me. 3. Alright, we only got one more now, which is that one.
Okay.
So you can take that off.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3. Pull out these gears, 1 and 2. All of them are garbage. Now it's pretty much going to be smooth sailing the rest of the way. The rest of the way till we're done. So I don't think. Oh, yep, that guy will just pull off right now. So we can go ahead and pull off our crank sprocket also. Not necessary, but definitely helps. Off, we can go ahead and take off the inner timing covers. We got a 10, 10. Someone cross-threaded that one in. 10, 10, and 10. And then this timing cover come right off. This side we got 10, 10, 10. So tensioner bracket's gonna be 312, 12, 12. Tensioner bracket comes off, and then you can get timing cover out. So the dipstick has 1 bolt up here. The water pipes have 1 up here on the front. They also have 1 up here on the top, but we're gonna leave that one on for now. We're gonna grab our pliers and undo the hoses from the water pump down here. We have new ones for these too, so I'm not too concerned if these get chewed up. There's that one. that one. Come up here, take off the other water pipe bolt. There's 110 for the dipstick. The dipstick should come free. We can go ahead and pull a dipstick out. Just kind of wiggle it a little bit, wiggle it around and pull on it. These water pipes out of the way first. There we go, now it's coming out. Dipstick tube's out. So oil fill tube, 210 or 310s. Take this guy off. Grab a 17, do the AVCS line here. Take that guy off, that's going to leak oil. One of the filters just fell right out, so that's nice. Go ahead and grab a 10 mil and take off the crank position sensor. To finish off this side of the engine, we go ahead and remove our cam position sensor here. Take that guy out, set it aside. And then we can go ahead and remove our knock sensor up here. I mean, we can also take out this AVCS solenoid since we're not reusing it. We can just throw that away. So just pull it right out. Throw this guy away because we don't reuse these. Never reuse them on a blown up motor. So 12, take out the knock sensor here. All right, so our driver's side is all done. It's all cleaned up. Well, it's not cleaned up, but it's all disassembled. Now we're gonna jump over to, we're actually gonna flip this over, jump to the bottom, so that way we can get off the exhaust manifold, the oil pan, all that stuff. So looking at the bottom of the engine now, which just made an absolute mess everywhere. We need to get the motor mounts off, which there's two 14s for those, so we'll start there. We are replacing these, so I'm gonna toss ours. They don't need to go that tight. Now take your motor mounts off after breaking them free from the moon. Like I said, we're just keeping the bolts on ours. If you are keeping yours, keep them. We're not. To take the heat shields off of these exhaust manifolds off. He is replacing this exhaust manifold. This one's just rusted out and nasty. I don't think any of these are gonna cooperate with us, but I think they're all just gonna end up either snapping around it. Go around, take off the 12s. Out. There's one heat shield. So if the heat shield's off, it lets us access the bolts that hold the manifold to the block. But just by loosening these does not mean this manifold's going to come off because there is still an up pipe support that is holding the turbo side to the block. Go ahead and get at least the 14s. There's 6 of them. If you just look at the manifold, you'll be able to see them. What actually might make our life a little bit easier is separating the exhaust manifold from the up pipe. So let me see if that's going to cooperate with us real quick. That did cooperate. Cool. So all I did was just unbolt the exhaust manifold from the up pipe, so that way we can just take the exhaust manifold off right now. Connect the manifold to the up pipe, which is going to be over here on the turbo side. You should just be able to pull up on it to get it off. Just like that. Let's actually go ahead and pop this oil pan off. It's just going to be a series of 10mm bolts around the oil pan. Then we can get a little like scraper, flathead, pry this guy off. But they didn't also. Oil pan. Oh yeah, we got metal in there. Bottom of the engine's looking pretty gross, you guys. To show you, we got some nice metal chunks all right here. We got some down there. We got some in the oil pickup as well. There's just metal absolutely everywhere in this, in here at least. Even in the oil cooler, like you guys can see, oh, it's like blackish, shiny metal all up in the oil cooler. Another reason why we don't reuse those. And then if you look in the oil pan, there's glitter everywhere in there, down in the bottom of the crevices. So a lot of people will try to clean these and reuse them. Don't do that. You're never gonna get, unless you spend hours, it is cheaper to spend the $65 to $100 on a new STI oil pan than it is to try to clean them. It's not worth it. The extra security that you'll get by putting a new one on here is just greater than that. And I also want to touch on this because I mentioned this earlier. If you have dual AVCS, your solenoids will be here and your cam position sensors will be right here. So now we're gonna go ahead and pop off the pickup tube, the windage tray, toss those in the trash, pop off this oil cooler, because the only thing we need is this oil cooler line off of here, and then we can just throw the rest of this in the garbage. We need one fitting on the bottom of the block that's right there, and then we're pretty much done on the bottom side of this. So get the oil cooler off. You got this one bolt here. It's a 24. Just undo that and it comes right out. And then our oil cooler can wiggle around all freely. There's one 10 mil holding it to the oil pump. Pop that guy off. Slide off this assembly here. I need this hose clamp to come up and off. I just want the clamps off of this because they're good to keep. I just want this hard line. That's all I want. There we go, hard line's off for the oil cooler. Now we can pop off this stuff, and then we're pretty much done on the bottom side here. Windage trace off. Garbage also. We go ahead and get that plug off, which is also a 24. Pretty much it for the bottom side. Now we can flip this thing back over, get the turbo and the up pipe off, and then, yeah, see, look at this. Then we can finish, and then we can get the heads off, start rebuilding the heads. And now, like I said, there are a couple support brackets. There's one right here, there's another right here, and then there's one inside, back behind the up pipe here. Once we can hit those three, we can get the turbo and the up pipe off together, and then I can cut that nut off at a later point. So for now, this oil feed line, I'm just gonna kind of try to move it out of the way a little bit. Just kind of bend it, or you can undo these two lines. It's really up to you. But let's get these 14s off. There's that one. Oh my God! It finally came off! It happened! The bolt came off! Now this turbo can just come off. Look at that. You can easily get this stuff off. So I just gotta hit this 14 right here, and then this up pipe support bracket. Actually, I can just take the up pipe off. Right here, hit this one. You guys saw the up pipe just kind of dip down a little bit. There we go. Up pipe's off. This is actually just garbage. You can get this up pipe support bracket now. That's off. Now we just need to get off some of these accessories. So we got oil line here, AVCS guy here we can take off, water line on the back, and then we can start dismantling this to a bare naked short block and start putting together our new one. Back side of the passenger side head, you'll have a 17 right here for the water line. Take that out, banjo bolt. You'll have a 17 right here for oil feed. Take that out. Now we need to swap to a 10. So we can go ahead and pop off this 10 to get the water line off. Take out the old AVCS solenoid, because that is garbage. Pop off this oil feed line, or this banjo bolt for this oil feed line here. These filters, if they fall out, good. Leave them out. Those filters will clog and clog the oil system, so we always take them out. Last up, take out this 10 here for the oil feed line, and then you can go ahead and just pull the feed line off like that. Now, we're ready to start dismantling the engine. So we're gonna start with the right-hand cylinder head right here. Start by taking out the valve cover. Whole bunch of 10s going around the outside of it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We can pop off this valve cover here. Someone's been in here because that's like a Felpro gasket. Felpro's pretty trash, don't use Felpro. So let me clear out some room to set the cams, the cam caps, the cam carriers, everything, because all of this has a very specific order for the buckets and everything like that. So we will be labeling all of these as we take them out. I can tell just looking in here, the cam journals or the cam lobes all look good, no scoring. We'll check the caps and everything once we get it all off. Couple light taps on the back side of up here. There's a plate. Just give it some love taps. After it's broken free, you can kind of wiggle it up and off like that. Go ahead and take out the intake cam. We can go ahead and pop off the cam seal. Toss that. Intake cam comes out. Grab the exhaust cam, and I'll show you guys my setup with all these once we get this head off. Exhaust cam right here. Now these little buckets here, we're gonna go ahead and label them because I'm gonna take all these out right now. because I'm gonna rebuild this head, and all of these have a very specific place. They're all different sizes. So you don't wanna get these mixed up, get them wrong, because then your valve lash is gonna be all screwed. So we're just gonna go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now I'm gonna grab a magnet and pull all those out. We'll pull all these out. We're at the point where we can go ahead and start pulling this head off. I may need to have someone come help me and just hold the engine, but we'll find out. Alright, there's 1 out of 6 on this side. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, can I get a yeah, mamacita? 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. So now that all the head bolts are broken loose, we can go ahead and just zap them out. We are not reusing these. People ask if they can, technically speaking, as long as they're not stretched. Yes, you can. I thought you were changing my song. All right, once all your head bolts are out, you go ahead and just grab the head, pop it right off, you guys. Set it aside in a safe spot. For your cylinder heads, this is how I lay mine out. I've got right hand, left hand. I've got the rear of the engine. If I'm standing looking at the head, this is the rear of the engine, this is the front, the bottom, the top. Intake cam, exhaust cam, all my buckets are labeled 1 through 8. And then if you move them, they all have labeling on the cardboard, so that way we know where they go. Cam caps are all labeled. Don't intermix them. They are head specific. If you are curious, they are labeled on the top of the cam cap where they go, intake, exhaust, and which head they belong to. So that's how I lay out my head stuff. And then I've got the heads over here, which I'm going to rebuild after they get cleaned. We'll swap to these Brian Crower valve springs. We'll put new valve stem seals in them. We will lap up the valves. We will have the machine shop pressure check everything. We'll have them hot tanked. We'll have the heads entirely gone through. So that'll be it for this video on disassembly. We're going to do another probably hour-long video on reassembly of the new block, how to put everything together, check your clearances, rebuild this. It might be an hour and a half long. That one's gonna be a long one. Literally everything, how to time it, how to put it all back together, where all the hoses go, how to seal everything up, what to do, what not to do kind of deal. So I hope this video helped you guys. That took me forever to edit, so I sure as shit hope so. If you guys have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to throw them down in the comment section below. Myself or others will try to help where we can. So with that, that's all I got for you guys on this one. If you like the video, you know what to do. Go ahead and hit that like button, turn it black, blue, green, yellow, purple, silver, cyan, whatever color it turns for you. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel and you want to be, put it in one of these corners. No idea which one quite yet. But with that, I will catch you guys in the next one. So peace out, homies.